Story number 1. Echoes beneath the ice. The silence of Lake Baikal is a kind of silence you don't find anywhere else. It's thick and heavy, pressing down on you like the icy air itself. In the winter of 2015, when my friends and I decided to camp on the frozen surface of the world's deepest lake, we thought we were prepared. We weren't. I still hear the whispers sometimes, faint echoes carried by the wind or perhaps by my fractured memory. They remind me of the terrible stillness of that place, of the secrets that lie beneath its ancient waters. Even now, I can't explain what happened, but I know one thing: Baikal is alive in ways no one can understand, and it doesn't take kindly to trespassers. It was late February when we arrived at Baikal. A group of 6, me, Anya, Sasha, Kirill, Dmitry, and Lena. We were seasoned adventurers, drawn to the frozen wilderness by stories of its haunting beauty. The lake stretched out before us like a vast, glassy desert, its surface frozen in intricate patterns of blue and white. Beneath the ice, you could see dark fissures and bubbles trapped in time, reminders of the living, breathing entity below. The locals in Listvianka, the small village where we'd stopped to restock supplies, had warned us against camping too far out on the ice. "It's not the cold that will get you," an old fisherman had said, his voice low and grave. "It's the lake itself. It's restless in winter. It takes things." We laughed it off. Superstition was part of the charm of Siberia, after all. But as we trekked farther from the shore, the air grew colder, sharper, as if the lake resented our intrusion. We set up camp about 2 miles out, a small cluster of bright-colored tents against the endless expanse of white. The ice beneath us groaned occasionally, a deep, resonant sound that made my chest tighten every time it echoed. Dmitry joked that it was the lake's way of saying hello. I didn't laugh. The first night was uneventful. We huddled around a portable heater, swapping stories and passing around a flask of vodka to keep warm. The stars above were so bright it felt like you could reach out and touch them, their light reflecting off the ice in eerie, shifting patterns. It was on the second night that everything changed. I woke to the sound of knocking. It was faint at first, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from all around us. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but then I heard Anya whisper my name from the next tent. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I sat up, my breath visible in the frigid air. The knocking continued, louder now, as if someone or something was rapping on the ice just outside the tent. It wasn't the creaking or groaning we'd heard before. It was deliberate, purposeful, and it was coming closer. One by one, the others woke, their faces pale in the dim light of our lanterns. Sasha unzipped the tent flap, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing across the ice. There was no response. Kirill, ever the skeptic, grabbed his boots. "It's probably just the ice expanding," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Let's check it out." We stepped outside into the biting cold, our breath clouding the air as we scanned the empty expanse. The moon cast a pale light over the ice, making it glisten like a sheet of glass. There was nothing, no one. The knocking had stopped. But then Lena pointed to something near the edge of our campsite. A set of footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, leading away from our tents toward the center of the lake. They were unlike any tracks I'd ever seen, long, narrow, with an odd spacing between them, as if whoever made them had an unnatural gait. "What the hell is that?" Dmitry muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. We followed the tracks for a few yards before they abruptly stopped, as if whoever or whatever had made them had vanished into thin air. The ice beneath us was smooth and unbroken, offering no explanation for the sudden disappearance. "I'm going back to the tent," Anya said, her voice shaking. "This isn't right." None of us argued. The next morning, we discovered the hole. It was massive, at least 6 feet across, and perfectly circular. The edges were smooth, as if the ice had been melted rather than broken. It hadn't been there the night before, we were certain of that. And just like the footprints, the hole seemed to defy logic. There was no debris, no cracks radiating outward, just a clean, gaping void that disappeared into the inky blackness below. But that wasn't the worst part. Around the hole, we found more footprints, dozens of them, all leading toward the opening. Some were small, like those of a child. Others were larger, impossibly large. And some seemed to have no discernible shape at all, just strange, twisted impressions in the snow. Something came out, Lena whispered, her face pale. Or went in, Sasha added grimly. We packed up that morning, too shaken to stay another night. The trek back to shore felt like a lifetime, the silence of the lake weighing on us like a physical presence. None of us spoke, our eyes darting nervously to the horizon, half expecting to see something emerge from the ice behind us. When we finally reached the village, the old fisherman was waiting. He didn't say a word, just shook his head as if he knew. We didn't tell him what we'd seen. What would have been the point? Instead, we left Baikal behind, vowing never to return. Years later, I still think about that night, about the knocking, the tracks, the hole in the ice, about the things we couldn't explain and the things we didn't want to. Sometimes, when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can hear it again, that faint, rhythmic tapping, like a warning from something deep and ancient. Lake Baikal is the oldest and deepest lake in the world, a place of staggering beauty and mystery. But beneath its frozen surface lies something else, something that doesn't belong in our world. And sometimes, when the ice is thin and the wind is still, calls out, waiting for someone to answer. Story number 2. The Forgotten Camp. I didn't believe in legends, not then. At least, the Black Forest, with all its twisted fairy tales and whispered superstitions, was just another destination on my list, place to explore, photograph, and write about for my travel blog. When my friends suggested a winter camping trip there, I was eager to tag along. None of us knew that by the end of it, we would wish we'd never set foot in that forest. The winter of 1999 was brutal in southern Germany. Snow blanketed the land in a suffocating silence, and temperatures plunged so low that even the most prepared travelers would think twice before venturing out. But we were young, fearless, and armed with gear that we believed would protect us from the elements and anything else. There were 4 of us, me, Sarah, Tom, and Eva. We arrived at the edge of the Black Forest just as the sun was setting, its last golden rays slipping behind the dense canopy of ancient pines. The locals at the nearby village had warned us against camping during the winter. People go missing here, the innkeeper had said, his voice low and thick with warning. Especially in the snow. Things vanish. But we laughed it off, dismissing his words as the superstitions of someone who had spent too many winters alone. The Black Forest was famous for its eerie tales. After all, stories of witches, phantoms, and shadowy figures that appeared and disappeared with the snow. We hiked into the forest, the crunch of our boots on the frozen ground the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. The trees stood tall and dark, their branches heavy with snow, casting long, skeletal shadows on the white blanket below. It was beautiful, in a way that made your skin crawl. By the time we found a clearing to set up camp, the temperature had dropped further, and the wind had picked up, carrying with it whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. We pitched our tents quickly, eager to get a fire going and settle in for the night. The first few hours were uneventful. We sat around the fire, sharing stories and sipping hot chocolate from thermoses. The flames cast flickering shadows on the surrounding trees, and for a while, it felt like any other camping trip. But then, just past midnight, the forest changed. It started with the lights. A sudden, blinding flash illuminated the clearing, so bright it turned night into day for a split second. We all froze, shielding our eyes, and when the light faded, we were plunged into darkness so thick it felt suffocating. "What the hell was that?" Tom whispered, his voice trembling. No one answered. We scanned the forest, our flashlights darting between the trees. But there was nothing, just the silent, unmoving pines and the endless snow. Then we heard the whispers. They came from every direction, soft and unintelligible, like the murmurs of a crowd just out of reach. It wasn't German, or English, or any language I recognized. It was something older, something wrong. "Who's there?" Eva called out, her voice cracking. The whispers stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind and the pounding of my heart. Then, far off in the forest, a faint glow appeared, pulsed softly, like a lantern swaying in the breeze. But it was too cold, too pale, to be firelight. Against my better judgment, I stepped toward it, drawn by a mix of fear and curiosity. "Wait," Sarah hissed, grabbing my arm. "Don't go." But the light grew closer on its own, as if it was moving toward us. It flickered between the trees, casting strange, shifting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. The whispers returned, louder this time, and I realized with a jolt that they were coming from the light. The air grew colder as the light approached, so cold that my breath froze midair, forming tiny crystals that fell to the ground. The fire sputtered and died, leaving us in near-total darkness save for the pale, pulsating glow. Tom broke the spell. "We need to leave. Now." We scrambled to pack our gear, our hands shaking too much to tie knots or zip bags. The whispers were deafening now, overlapping voices that seemed to seep into my skull, filling my head with a pressure that made it hard to think. The light moved closer, revealing something just behind it. Shapes, shifting and indistinct, like figures trapped in fog. We abandoned the gear and ran, following the faint tracks we'd left in the snow earlier that evening. But the forest had changed. The trees seemed closer together, the paths narrower and more tangled. Our flashlights flickered, their beams weak and unreliable. And then, the footprints disappeared. We stopped, panting, as we realized we were standing in a perfect, undisturbed blanket of snow. The tracks we'd followed simply ended, as if we'd been dropped into the middle of the forest with no way out. The whispers surrounded us, louder than ever, and I swear I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. "Keep moving," Sarah urged, her voice barely audible over the noise. We stumbled blindly through the forest, the light following us like a predator stalking its prey. I glanced back once and saw them, figures moving in the trees, their shapes tall and thin, their faces hidden in the shadows. They moved unnaturally, jerking and twisting as if they were broken marionettes. At some point, we found ourselves back in the clearing where we'd camped, though none of us remembered turning around. The tents were gone. The fire pit was gone. Even the tracks we'd made setting up camp were gone, erased as if we had never been there. All that remained was the snow, untouched and pristine, and the light, which now hovered at the center of the clearing, pulsed once, twice, then vanished, taking the whispers with it. The silence that followed was absolute, oppressive, and it was only then that I realized how loud the whispers had been. When dawn broke, we were still standing in that clearing, too afraid to move. The forest looked normal again, bathed in the soft, golden light of morning, but the clearing remained eerily untouched, as if the snow had fallen fresh during the night. Our gear was gone, and with it, any proof that we had ever been there. We made our way back to the village in silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us like the snow-laden branches above. The innkeeper didn't ask why we were back so soon. He just gave us a knowing look and handed us hot tea. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. We didn't answer, but he nodded as if we had. "The forest doesn't like visitors in the winter," he said. "Best you don't come back." To this day, I don't know what we encountered in the Black Forest. Some nights, I convinced myself it was all a hallucination, a shared dream brought on by the cold and exhaustion. But then I remember the whispers, the figures, the light, and the way the forest erased every trace of our presence. It was as if the forest itself had rejected us, wiping us from its memory. And sometimes, late at night when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear those whispers again, calling me back to a place I vowed I would never return. Story number 3. Whispers of the Rockies. I never expected the Rockies to feel so alive. Growing up in Colorado, I'd always seen the mountain range as a symbol of quiet majesty, a towering expanse of snow-capped peaks and endless forests. But that winter in 1980, when my family and I ventured into its icy heart, I learned just how deceptive silence could be, and just how alive the mountains truly were. I was only 12 at the time, tagging along with my parents and my older sister, Megan, for what Dad promised would be a proper family adventure. He was a mountaineer in his youth, and every winter, he'd get this itch to prove he could still handle the wilderness. Mom, ever the optimist, thought it would be good for us. A weekend in a rented camper deep in the Rockies, surrounded by snow, stars, and nothing else. When we set off from Denver, the world felt wrapped in a blanket of white. Snow fell in thick, soft flakes, dusting the car windshield as we drove higher and higher into the mountains. The campground was secluded, miles from the nearest road, tucked into a dense forest with towering pines that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. We parked the camper in a small clearing and set up for the night. The fire crackled as we roasted marshmallows, the air cold enough to bite our noses but not enough to drive us inside. For a while, everything felt perfect, just the four of us against the wilderness. But that perfection didn't last. The first sound came just after midnight. I woke to the muffled cry of what sounded like a child. It was faint, almost swallowed by the wind, but distinct enough to send a chill down my spine. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then Megan stirred in her sleeping bag next to me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. I nodded, pulling the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders. The crying continued, soft and mournful, drifting in from somewhere beyond the camper. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. There was something too human about it, too desperate. Probably just the wind. Dad mumbled groggily from his cot, though I could tell he was wide awake now. Mom sat up, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the camper window. "That's not the wind," she said, her voice barely audible. Dad sighed, throwing on his coat and boots. "I'll check it out," he muttered, grabbing the flashlight from the counter. "Wait," Mom said, grabbing his arm. "Don't go alone." But Dad shook her off, his pride winning out over caution. Megan and I huddled close to Mom as Dad stepped out into the snow, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The crying stopped the moment the door creaked open, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. We listened, every muscle in our bodies tense, as Dad's boots crunched on the snow outside. Then he called back, his voice strained. "There's nothing out here." By morning, the crying had become a joke, or at least, Dad tried to make it one, over eggs cooked on the tiny camper stove. He laughed about how the Rockies are full of strange sounds, brushing off our unease, but none of us could ignore the tension in the air, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine layer of white around the camper. It was Megan who noticed the footprints first. Tiny, childlike prints leading from the edge of the forest to the camper and back again. They were impossibly small, like they'd been made by a barefoot child, and they didn't belong to any of us. The strange part? The snow around them was untouched. No sign of an approach or departure. Just those perfect, solitary tracks leading into the woods. "That's weird," Dad admitted, his usual bravado faltering. Mom said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. We decided to stay close to the camper for the rest of the day, sticking together as we explored the clearing. The tracks stayed with us, a constant reminder of the inexplicable. Megan and I couldn't stop staring at them. The eerie perfection of the tiny prints burned into our minds. That night, the crying returned. It was louder this time, Closer. The sound pierced through the walls of the camper, its desperation clawing at my chest. Megan gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin as we both held our breath. Mom and Dad were already awake, their faces grim as the sound filled the small space. Then came the scratching. It started faintly, a soft, insistent scraping at the door of the camper. My stomach turned to ice as the sound grew louder, more frantic, like nails dragging across the metal. Dad grabbed the flashlight again, his face pale as he moved toward the door. "Don't," Mom said sharply, her voice trembling. It's not a person." But Dad ignored her, yanking the door open. The wind howled, cold air rushing in as he shone the flashlight into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the snow, pristine and untouched, stretching out into the night. The crying stopped. The next morning, we found the camper in shambles. The side paneling was scratched and torn, the metal warped as if something massive had raked its claws across it. Our gear was scattered in the snow, and the firewood pile had been toppled, the logs arranged in strange, spiraling patterns. Most chilling of all was the discovery Megan made near the extinguished fire. A single, tiny glove, lying in the snow. It was child-sized, made of wool, and when Megan picked it up, she gasped. "It's warm," she whispered, dropping it as if it had burned her. None of us had any answers. We packed up as quickly as we could, the unease growing with every passing minute. As we drove down the mountain, the snow began to fall again, erasing the tracks and the strange, spiraling patterns. But the glove stayed with us, a haunting reminder of what we had experienced. It wasn't until years later that I learned about the disappearances. In the 1930s, several children had gone missing near that same stretch of forest. Locals spoke of ghostly figures wandering the woods, of cries in the night and footprints that led nowhere. Some said the children had been taken by the mountains themselves, their spirits doomed to wander the Rockies for eternity. Others believed something darker, something older, lived in those woods, a malevolent force that preyed on the lost and the vulnerable. I don't know what we encountered that winter. I don't know if it was the spirits of those lost children or something far more sinister, but I do know that the Rockies are alive in ways we can't begin to understand. They watch, they listen, and sometimes they call out. Even now, when the wind howls and the snow falls thick and heavy, I hear it, the faint cry of a child lost in the wilderness, a sound that chills me to my very soul. And I wonder, was it trying to warn us? Or was it calling us deeper into the dark? Story number 4. Whispers in the white. I still wake up in the dead of night, the icy tendrils of winter clinging to my skin like the relentless whispers that haunt my every thought. It's been over a decade since that fateful winter in the Vermont wilderness. Yet the memories of that chilling night remain as vivid and unforgiving as the snow-covered trees that stood sentinel around our secluded campsite. Tonight, as I sit alone in my dimly lit study, the flickering light from the fireplace casts long, wavering shadows on the walls, and I can almost hear the distant echoes of those ghostly whispers, carried by the restless spirits that linger in the heart of the forest. I was part of a tight-knit group of friends, Tom, Sarah, Mike, Jenna, and me, drawn together by our shared love for adventure and the unyielding call of the wild. The allure of winter camping had always fascinated us, a test of our endurance and a chance to bond away from the distractions of everyday life. Vermont's remote forests, with their pristine beauty and untamed wilderness, seemed like the perfect destination for our winter expedition. The winter of 2011 was particularly harsh, the snow falling thick and heavy, transforming the landscape into a monochromatic expanse of white and gray. We arrived at the edge of the forest on a frigid December afternoon, our breath visible in the icy air as we unloaded our gear. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow, creating a canopy that offered little protection against the biting cold. We set up our tents in a small clearing near a frozen pond, the silence of the forest broken only by the crunch of our boots on the snow and the occasional call of a distant owl. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of anguished spirits. We huddled together around a small campfire, the warmth of the flames a fragile barrier against the encroaching chill. The conversation flowed easily at first, filled with laughter and the excitement of our adventure. But as the night deepened, an unsettling tension began to settle over us, the shadows cast by the firelight dancing ominously on the surrounding trees. Around midnight, amidst the chaos of the storm, we heard it, a faint, rhythmic thumping on the snow outside our tents. At first, we dismissed it as the shifting of the ice or perhaps an animal seeking shelter. But the sound grew louder, more deliberate, echoing through the stillness of the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced around, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. The shadows seemed to deepen, the darkness pressing in from all sides, making our small campsite feel like a fragile barrier against the unknown. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Tom, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. He nodded, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Yeah, it sounded like footsteps." We froze, the only sound the pounding of our own hearts and the relentless assault of the storm outside. The thumping continued, now accompanied by soft, indistinct whispering that seemed to swirl around our tents like the icy tendrils of the wind. The whispers were barely audible, their words lost in the chaos of the storm. But the tone was unmistakably desperate, filled with an unspoken plea that sent chills down my spine. "Maybe someone lost their way," Sarah suggested, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. But deep down, we all knew it was something else, something far more sinister. The legends of the forest, stories passed down by the locals, spoke of restless spirits and malevolent entities that roamed the wilderness, especially during the harshest winters. Most dismissed these tales as mere folklore, but the eerie sounds outside our tents made it impossible to ignore the possibility that the old stories held a kernel of truth. As the night wore on, the sounds intensified, the thumping turning into dragging footsteps that circled our campsite with an unnerving persistence. The whispers grew louder, their voices intertwining with the howling wind into a symphony of despair. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what we were hearing, but the primal fear that gripped me left little room for logic. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the night, followed by the ominous sound of ice breaking underfoot. We sprang from our tents, the sound of the snowstorm now mingling with the chaos of the unknown presence that stalked us. Through the blinding snow, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing at the edge of our campsite, its form barely discernible against the swirling whiteout. It was tall, imposing, and moved with a deliberate grace that defied the ferocity of the storm. "Stay together," Tom shouted, grabbing my arm as we stumbled towards the safety of the tent. But before we could react, the figure let out a low, guttural growl that resonated through the frozen air, sending a wave of terror crashing over us. The ground beneath our feet seemed to tremble, the very essence of the forest coming alive with malevolent intent. The figure began to move closer, each step deliberate and heavy, the snow crunching ominously under its weight. Desperate to survive, we turned to flee, but the storm had other plans. The wind intensified, swirling around us in a vortex of fury that made it impossible to move forward or backward. The shadowy figure loomed closer, its presence suffocating, as if it sought to claim us as it had done to those who had perished in the forest before us. In a frantic bid for escape, I grabbed Jenna's hand, pulling her away from the approaching threat. "Run!" I screamed, our breaths visible in the frigid air as we sprinted through the snow. The sound of our footsteps lost in the roaring storm. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes that reached out with skeletal hands, trying to drag us back into the abyss. The whispers of the lost echoed in our minds, their voices a haunting reminder of the thin line between life and death, hope and despair. "Leave, now," they seemed to chant, their words a dire warning that we could not ignore. As we raced through the blinding snow, the shadowy figure remained just behind us. Constant, oppressive presence that fueled our desperation to survive. The landscape became a frozen labyrinth, each step taking us deeper into the heart of the wilderness. The storm now a living entity that sought to tear us apart. Just as my legs began to give way from exhaustion, a faint glimmer of moonlight broke through the clouds, illuminating a path that seemed to lead out of the forest. Summoning the last of my strength, I pulled Jenna towards the faint light, the promise of safety a beacon in the relentless storm. The shadowy figure loomed closer, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light that pierced through the darkness like twin beacons of terror. "We have to keep moving," I urged, my voice hoarse from fear and exertion. "We're almost there." But the forest had other plans. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the snow piling higher with each passing moment, making it impossible to discern one step from the next. The shadowy figure advanced relentlessly, its presence a constant reminder that we were not alone, that the legends were true. In a final, desperate attempt to escape, we sprinted towards the edge of the forest, the moon now shining brightly overhead, casting long shadows that danced eerily on the snow. The wind began to abate, the howling subsiding into a mournful whisper as dawn broke over the frozen landscape. Exhausted and battered, we collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, the horrors of the night lingering in our minds as we tried to make sense of the inexplicable events that had transpired. When morning finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a serene yet haunting landscape. We lay there in silence, the only signs of the night's terror the strange, large footprints encircling our campsite, leading to nowhere and disappearing into the vast expanse of snow. The footprints were unlike any human traces we had ever seen, massive, with elongated toes and an eerie, otherworldly pattern that hinted at a presence far beyond our understanding. Determined to find answers, we followed the footprints deep into the forest, the trail leading us further away from civilization and deeper into the heart of the unknown. Days turned into weeks as we navigated the treacherous terrain, the cold growing more intense with each passing day. The whispers of the lost echoed in my mind, their voices a constant reminder of the thin line between curiosity and hubris. On the seventh night, as we made camp near a frozen stream, the temperature plummeted to an unbearable low. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the faint sound of desperate cries and mournful wails. Exhausted and frostbitten, we huddled together for warmth, the shadows around us seeming to move and shift with a life of their own. It was then that we heard it, a soft, sorrowful moan emanating from the darkness beyond the firelight. Before we could react, a figure emerged from the shadows, its presence both terrifying and heartbreaking. The winter spirit stood before us, its eyes hollow and filled with an eternal sorrow. It extended a massive hand towards us, the gesture both inviting and menacing. "Leave," it whispered, the voice resonating with the pain of countless lost souls. "Or join us in the eternal night." Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of our situation. The winter spirit was not merely a creature to be feared, it was a guardian of the forest, bound by a tragic fate that mirrored our own. The whispers grew louder, surrounding us with voices of those who had vanished before us, their pleas a haunting symphony that filled the frozen air. Desperate to survive, we turned to flee, but the cold was too intense, our bodies numb and unresponsive. The winter spirit advanced, its footsteps echoing like the beating of 1,000 drums, each step bringing it closer to us. Shadows danced around us, the spirits of the lost intertwining. Story number 5. Whispers on the Himalayan snow. I still wake up in the dead of night, the echoes of that fateful winter expedition reverberating through my dreams like the relentless howls of the Himalayan wind. It's been over 3 decades since our group ventured into the heart of the Himalayas. Yet the memories of that harrowing experience remain as vivid and haunting as the snow-covered peaks that stand sentinel over the remote wilderness. Tonight, As I sit alone in my study, the flickering light from my desk lamp casts long, wavering shadows on the walls, and I can almost hear the distant whispers of the mountains, carrying the sorrow of the lost souls who dared to challenge their icy embrace. I was part of a tight-knit group of friends, avid mountaineers drawn together by our shared passion for adventure and the unyielding call of the wild. The allure of conquering new heights and the promise of untouched trails had led us to the lesser-known trails of the Himalayas, where legends of mysterious creatures and ancient curses were whispered among the local villagers. Most dismissed these tales as mere folklore, remnants of a bygone era, but for some inexplicable reason, I found myself both intrigued and unsettled by them. The winter of 1993 was unforgiving. The snow fell thick and heavy, blanketing the landscape in a pristine layer of white that concealed the dangers lurking beneath. We set up our base camp near a secluded valley. The only signs of life, the distant call of an eagle and the occasional rustle of a snow leopard moving stealthily through the trees. The isolation was both exhilarating and terrifying, the silence broken only by the howling wind and the crunch of our boots on the frozen ground. Our days were consumed by treks through the desolate wilderness, each step taking us deeper into the heart of the mountains. The air was thin, the cold biting through every layer of clothing, seeping into our bones with an intensity that made every breath a struggle. Despite the harsh conditions, there was an unspoken camaraderie among us, a bond forged through shared hardship and the unyielding spirit of exploration. On the fourth day of our expedition, as we navigated a particularly treacherous ridge, the sky darkened ominously, the clouds heavy with impending snow. The weather forecast had predicted a severe storm, but we were undeterred, driven by our desire to push the boundaries of our endurance. As night fell, we retreated to our tents, the warmth of our campfires a fragile barrier against the growing chill. It was during that first night that we saw it, a colossal shadow moving against the wind, barely discernible through the blinding snowstorm. At first, we dismissed it as a trick of the light or perhaps the silhouette of a wandering animal. But the sheer size and the unnatural grace of its movements left us with an uneasy sense of foreboding. The figure seemed to glide effortlessly across the snow, its presence almost ethereal, as if it were a ghost haunting the desolate landscape. As we huddled together in our tents, trying to ignore the unsettling sight, the storm intensified, the wind howling louder than ever before, as if trying to communicate a dire warning. Around midnight, amidst the chaos of the tempest, we heard it, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the mountains. Our hearts pounded in unison, the fear of the unknown gripping us with an icy hand. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. Jake, our de facto leader, nodded grimly. "Stay calm. It's probably just a snow leopard or something." But deep down, we all knew it was something else, something far more sinister. The growling persisted, growing louder and more menacing, as if the creature was drawing closer, closing in on our fragile sanctuary. We tried to rationalize it, convincing ourselves that fear was playing tricks on our minds. But the primal dread lingering in the air was impossible to ignore. Around 3 a.m., the storm reached its peak, the wind now a violent force that threatened to tear our tents apart. Suddenly, there was a loud thud against the side of our tent, followed by another, and then a series of rapid knocks that echoed through the darkness. My heart raced as I lay there, frozen with fear, the sounds of desperation mingling with the relentless storm. Without warning, the tent ripped open, the frigid wind assaulting us with a vengeance. I was jolted awake, the raw cold searing my skin, as Jake and the others scrambled to protect themselves from the onslaught. Through the tears in the fabric, I saw it, an immense shadowy figure standing just outside our tent, its eyes glowing with an unholy light that pierced through the night like twin beacons of terror. "Run!" Jake shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the entrance. The others followed suit, panic propelling us into action as the creature advanced with a terrifying grace. its massive form cutting through the snow like a specter from our darkest nightmares. We stumbled into the storm, the wind now a blinding fury that obscured our vision and disoriented our senses. The creature moved effortlessly through the snow, its footsteps leaving deep, clawed impressions in our wake. The sound of its movements a relentless reminder that we were not alone. The howls of the wind intertwined with the distant echoes of its growls, creating a symphony of fear that resonated deep within our souls. As we raced through the treacherous terrain, the storm showed no signs of relenting, the snow piling higher with each passing moment. Our path became increasingly convoluted, the landscape transforming into a frozen labyrinth that seemed to shift and twist around us, trapping us in a never-ending nightmare. The footprints of the creature were everywhere, encircling us with no clear direction to follow, as if it were playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. Hours passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion, the line between reality and nightmare blurring as we struggled to survive. Our breaths came in ragged gasps, the cold numbing our limbs and clouding our minds with terror. The whispers of the lost echoed in my mind, their voices a haunting reminder of the thin line between life and death, hope and despair. Just as all hope seemed lost, the storm began to abate, the winds dying down as dawn broke over the mountains, casting a pale light on the desolate landscape. We collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, our bodies battered and broken, the horrors of the night lingering in our minds as we tried to make sense of the inexplicable events that had transpired. The footprints of the creature were nowhere to be found, erased by the relentless snow, but the memory of those glowing eyes and the haunting presence remained, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of our ambition. We made our way back to civilization in silence, the bond between us forged through shared trauma and the unspoken understanding that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, but the memories of Dyatlov Pass continue to haunt me. On cold, silent nights, when the wind howls just right, I find myself staring into the darkness, wondering if the spirits of the lost still roam the pass. Their whispers a perpetual reminder of the thin line between curiosity and hubris, between discovery and desecration. The legend of the winter spirit stands as a chilling testament to the enduring power of fear and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the wilderness. I often return to my study, surrounded by photographs and notes from that expedition, trying to piece together the fragments of a story that defies rational explanation. The shadows, the whispers, the cries of the lost souls, they are all a part of Dyatlov Pass's enduring legacy, a curse that continues to claim its victims and leave its mark on those who dare to seek its secrets. In sharing this story, I hope to honor the memory of those who perished, to give voice to their silent screams that still echo through the corridors of time. Let it serve as a cautionary tale to those who dare to venture into the unknown, to respect the forces that lie beyond our control. For in the heart of Dyatlov Pass, amidst the swirling snow and restless spirits, lies a darkness that can never be fully understood or escaped. And so, when the winds howl and the snow begins to fall, I remember the whispers of Dyatlov Pass. I remember the faces of those we lost, their eyes filled with fear and sorrow, and I understand that some tragedies leave scars that time cannot heal, and some spirits never find the peace they so desperately seek. Dyatlov Pass may remain a place of mystery and horror, but its legacy endures, a chilling reminder of the night when humanity's curiosity met the unforgiving wrath of the unknown, creating a tale of horror that will never fade. Story number 6. Whispers from the dark. I still wake up in the dead of night, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, the remnants of a nightmare lingering like the frost that clings to the peaks surrounding our remote campsite. It's been years since that harrowing winter in Colorado. Yet the memories of that fateful night at Whispering Ridge haunt me with the same intensity as the howling winds that tore through our tent. Tonight, as I sit alone in my home, the flickering light from my desk lamp casts long, wavering shadows on the walls, and I can almost hear the distant echoes of those desperate whispers. carried by the restless spirits of the mountains. I was an experienced mountaineer, always drawn to the solitude and raw beauty of Colorado's wilderness. The allure of conquering new peaks and the thrill of the unknown had led me to Whispering Ridge, a secluded area renowned for its breathtaking vistas and treacherous weather patterns. In the winter of 2007, my friend Jake and I decided to embark on a solo expedition, eager to test our limits against the unforgiving elements. The first few days were a blend of exhilaration and exhaustion. We navigated through dense forests blanketed in snow, our footsteps crunching loudly against the frozen ground. The air was crisp, each breath a visible plume in the frigid air. As we made our way deeper into the heart of the wilderness, as night fell, we set up our tent in a small clearing near the base of Mount Elbert, the tallest peak in Colorado. The area was eerily quiet, the only sounds the whispering winds and the occasional crack of ice shifting in the distance. On the second night, a fierce snowstorm descended upon us with unprecedented fury. The wind howled like a chorus of tormented souls, and the temperature plummeted to unbearable lows. We huddled together in our tent, the warmth of our bodies a fragile barrier against the relentless cold. Despite the storm's intensity, we felt an unexplainable sense of unease, as if the mountains themselves were watching us, their ancient spirits stirring in anger. Around midnight, amidst the chaos of the storm, we heard it, a soft, rhythmic knocking at the tent door. My heart raced as I exchanged a worried glance with Jake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. He nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Yeah, it sounded like someone trying to get in." We froze, the only sound the pounding of our own hearts and the relentless assault of the storm outside. The knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent, as if whoever or whatever was outside was desperate for help. Gathering every ounce of courage, I unzipped the tent flap, peering out into the blinding snowstorm. First, there was nothing but swirling snow and darkness. The storm had obscured our surroundings, making it impossible to see anything beyond a few feet. But then, through the whiteout conditions, I saw a figure standing on the edge of our tent, tall and cloaked in a heavy coat. The person looked lost and disoriented, their breath visible in the frigid air. "Please, help me," the voice pleaded, trembling with fear. Jake and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Are you sure you're okay?" I called out, my voice shaking. The figure hesitated, then nodded slowly. I got lost in the storm. Please, I need shelter." Without thinking, we unzipped the tent wider, motioning for them to come in. The person stepped forward, their face obscured by the hood of their coat. As they entered, a wave of cold enveloped the tent, making me shiver uncontrollably. We offered them our blankets and a space to warm up, but something about their presence felt unsettling, as if they were more spirit than flesh. As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of relenting. The stranger remained silent, their eyes fixed on the flickering flames of our small lantern. Every now and then, they would glance out the tent, as if searching for something or someone in the blinding snow. Around 3 a.m., the knocking resumed, louder and more frantic this time. The stranger stirred, their eyes now reflecting an otherworldly glow that sent chills down my spine. "I need to go," they whispered, their voice filled with desperation. Jake and I exchanged alarmed glances. "What's wrong?" I asked cautiously. The figure hesitated, then slowly rose to their feet. "I can't stay here. It's not safe." Before we could respond, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the clearing outside, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that shook the tent. The storm seemed to intensify, the wind howling louder than ever, as if the very mountains were enraged. In that moment, the stranger's form began to shimmer and fade, their figure becoming translucent. "Run, now," they whispered, their voice fading into the howling wind. Panic surged through us as the tent began to shake violently, the weight of the storm pressing down on us. We scrambled to secure the tent, But the storm's fury was too much. The flap ripped open, and a wave of freezing wind tore through, extinguishing our lantern and plunging us into darkness. In the chaos, I felt a cold hand brush against my shoulder, followed by the sound of ghostly laughter that echoed through the tent. Jake and I screamed, huddling together as the storm raged on outside, the whispers of the lost souls filling our minds with terror. The tent seemed to collapse around us, the cold seeping into our very bones as we struggled to escape the wrath of the mountains. When morning finally broke, the storm had abated, leaving behind a serene yet haunting silence. We emerged from the tent, our bodies numb from the freezing night, only to find strange, large footprints encircling our campsite. The prints were unlike any human footprints we had ever seen, massive, with elongated toes and an eerie, otherworldly pattern. They circled our tent but led nowhere, as if the figure had vanished into thin air. Confused and terrified, we searched the surrounding area, but there was no sign of the stranger or any indication of what had transpired. The footprints remained a chilling reminder of that night, a testament to the inexplicable horrors that lurk in the heart of the wilderness. We packed up our gear in silence, the weight of the experience heavy on our shoulders, and made our way back to civilization, the shadows of Whispering Ridge forever etched into our souls. Years have passed since that night at Dyatlov Pass, but the memories linger like the frost that clings to the mountains each winter. On cold, silent nights, when the wind howls just right, I find myself staring into the darkness, wondering if the spirits of the lost still roam the pass. Their whispers a perpetual reminder of the thin line between life and death, hope and despair. The legend of the winter spirit stands as a chilling testament to the enduring power of fear and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the wilderness. I often return to my study, surrounded by photographs and notes from that expedition, trying to piece together the fragments of a story that defies rational explanation. The shadows, the whispers, the cries of the lost souls, they are all a part of Dyatlov Pass's enduring legacy, a curse that continues to claim its victims and leave its mark on those who dare to seek its secrets. In sharing this story, I hope to honor the memory of those who perished, to give voice to their silent screams that still echo through the corridors of time. Let it serve as a cautionary tale to those who dare to venture into the unknown, to respect the forces that lie beyond our control. For in the heart of Dyatlov Pass, amidst the swirling snow and restless spirits, lies a darkness that can never be fully understood or escaped. And so, when the winds howl and the night is thick with silence, I remember the curse of Dyatlov Pass. I remember the faces of those we lost, their eyes filled with fear and sorrow, and I understand that some tragedies leave scars that time cannot heal, and some spirits never find the peace they so desperately seek. Dyatlov Pass may remain a place of mystery and horror, but its legacy endures, a chilling reminder of the night when humanity's curiosity met the unforgiving wrath of the unknown, creating a tale of horror that will never fade. Story number 7. Whispers of Dyatlov Pass. I still wake up in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, the echoes of that fateful journey reverberating through my dreams like the relentless howl of the Siberian wind. It's been over a decade since I first ventured into the heart of the Ural Mountains. Yet the memories of Dyatlov Pass haunt me with the same intensity as the icy winds that swept through the desolate landscape that bitter winter night. Tonight, as I sit alone in my dimly lit study, the shadows cast by the flickering lamp dance eerily on the walls, and I can almost hear the distant cries of those lost souls, carried by the restless spirits that linger in the forgotten corridors of history. I was a young journalist, driven by a relentless curiosity to uncover the truth behind one of the most baffling and tragic incidents in mountaineering history, the Dyatlov Pass tragedy. The story of 9 experienced Russian hikers who perished mysteriously in 1959 had captivated my imagination for years. Official reports were vague, attributing their deaths to an unknown compelling force. But whispers of something far more sinister circulated among those who dared to delve deeper, determined to uncover the truth. I joined an expedition to retrace the steps of the ill-fated group, equipped with cameras, notebooks, and a steadfast resolve. My team and I set out into the unforgiving wilderness of the Ural Mountains, the same treacherous terrain that had claimed so many lives. The winter of 2010 was particularly brutal, the snow falling thick and heavy, turning the landscape into a monochromatic expanse of white and gray. Each step we took was a battle against the biting cold and the relentless wind, the isolation weighing heavily on our spirits. As we approached Dyatlov Pass, the air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. The stories of the locals echoed in my mind, tales of a malevolent presence that guarded the pass, ensuring that no one would disturb the restless spirits that roamed its icy corridors. They spoke of eerie sounds in the night, of shadows moving against the wind, and of a curse that befell those who dared to trespass during the harshest months. Skeptics dismissed these tales as mere folklore, but something about the stories called to me, urging me to uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath the snow and ice. On the third day of our expedition, as dusk settled over the pass, we set up camp near the remnants of what had once been a bustling trail. The tents were now mere shadows of their former selves, barely distinguishable against the vast, frozen landscape. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of tormented souls. We huddled together for warmth, the flickering light of our lanterns casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. Around midnight, amidst the chaos of a fierce blizzard, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic thumping beneath the snow. At first, I dismissed it as the shifting ice, but the sound grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the frozen expanse. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced around, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. The shadows around us seemed to deepen, the darkness pressing in from all sides, making the tent feel like a fragile barrier against the encroaching night. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Alex, my closest companion, his face pale in the dim light of our lantern. He nodded, eyes wide with fear. "It's coming from the pass," he replied, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Before anyone could respond, a piercing scream shattered the night, a sound so raw and filled with anguish that it sent chills down my spine. We sprang from our tents, the snow whipping around us with a ferocity that made it nearly impossible to see. Through the blinding storm, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the far end of the pass, its silhouette dark against the swirling snow. It was taller than any human, its form imposing and almost otherworldly, moving with a deliberate grace that defied the chaos of the storm. "Stay together," I shouted, grabbing Alex's arm as we stumbled through the snow, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The figure began to move towards us, each step leaving deep impressions in the fresh snow, the sound of its movement a haunting rhythm that echoed through the pass. As we reached the edge of the pass, the figure loomed closer, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Panic surged through me as I realized we were not alone, that the legends were true. The winter spirit, as the locals had called it, had come to reclaim those who dared to trespass into its domain during the harshest months. The wind howled louder, the shadows around us thickening, as if the very essence of the pass was alive with malevolent intent. "We need to get out of here," Alex shouted, his voice cracking with fear as he dragged me towards the path we had come. But the storm intensified, the snow swirling into a blinding vortex that obscured our vision and disoriented our senses. The figure reached out a massive hand towards us, its fingers elongated and clawed, a silent warning of the wrath it was prepared to unleash. The whispers of the lost echoed in my mind, their voices a haunting chorus that filled the air with sorrow and rage. "Leave, now," they seemed to chant, their voices intertwining with the howling wind into a symphony of despair. Desperation fueled our every move as we fought against the relentless storm, the wind biting at our faces and the cold seeping into our bones. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the snow-covered terrain a labyrinth of white and gray, making it impossible to discern one step from the next. The shadows danced around us, their presence a constant reminder that the winter spirit was always watching, always waiting to claim its next victim. Hours passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion, the line between reality and nightmare blurring as we struggled to survive. Our cameras captured nothing but the overwhelming whiteness, the relentless storm erasing any evidence of our presence. The whispers grew louder, the voices of the lost intertwining with the howling wind, their pleas a desperate reminder of the thin line between life and death. Just as all hope seemed lost, the storm began to abate, the winds dying down as dawn broke over the pass. We collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, the horrors of the night lingering in our minds as we tried to make sense of the inexplicable events that had transpired. The winter spirit had spared us, but the curse of Dyatlov Pass had left its mark, a chilling reminder of the thin line between curiosity and hubris, between discovery and desecration. As we made our way back to civilization, the faces of the lost haunted my every step, their eyes filled with fear and sorrow, a testament to the enduring power of the curse that bound them to this forsaken land. The official reports had offered no answers, no rational explanations for the strange injuries and the chaotic scene that had greeted rescuers years later. But I knew the truth. Something ancient and malevolent roamed the pass, a guardian of the forgotten souls who had perished in the unforgiving winter. Years have passed since that harrowing expedition, but the memories of Dyatlov Pass continue to haunt me. On cold, silent nights, when the wind howls just right, I find myself staring into the darkness, wondering if the spirits of the lost still roam the pass, their whispers a perpetual reminder of the curse that binds them to this desolate land. The legend of the winter spirit stands as a chilling testament to the enduring power of fear and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the wilderness. I often return to my study, surrounded by photographs and notes from that expedition, trying to piece together the fragments of a story that defies rational explanation. The shadows, the whispers, the cries of the lost souls, they are all a part of Dyatlov Pass's enduring legacy, a curse that continues to claim its victims and leave its mark on those who dare to seek its secrets. In sharing this story, I hope to honor the memory of those who perished, to give voice to their silent screams that still echo through the corridors of time. Let it serve as a cautionary tale to those who dare to venture into the unknown, to respect the forces that lie beyond our control. For in the heart of Dyatlov Pass, amidst the swirling snow and restless spirits, lies a darkness that can never be fully understood or escaped. And so, when the winds howl and the night is thick with silence, I remember the curse of Dyatlov Pass. I remember the faces of those we lost, their eyes filled with fear and sorrow, and I understand that some tragedies leave scars that time cannot heal, and some spirits never find the peace they so desperately seek. Dyatlov Pass may remain a place of mystery and horror, but its legacy endures, a chilling reminder of the night when humanity's curiosity met the unforgiving wrath of the unknown, creating a tale of horror that will never fade.